We live in an age of political polarization and preference bubbles, of economic change, rising threats, and a rapidly changing world. Canada needs to stay relevant. We need more smart conversations. We need to dive into critical issues and big ideas with passion and unrestrained optimism. I'm Erin O'Toole. Welcome to the Blue Skies Podcast. At the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, Canada comes together to remember our fallen, to remember the people who sacrificed it all for our liberties today. Going back to the earliest years of our country, and certainly the coming of age of Canada in World War I, World War II, Korea, peace conflicts, the Cold War, and of course today's topic, the war in Afghanistan. We are here to honor those who served our country and helped us create the greatest country in the world. And today, I'm very fortunate to be joined on the Blue Skies Political Podcast by General Rick Hillier, retired Chief of Defense Staff, who joined the Canadian Armed Forces the year I was born, 1973.
Oh, my Lord.
Sorry to start off that way, General. After graduating from Memorial University, Rick Hillier joined the Canadian Armed Forces, having been born in Campbellton, Newfoundland, joined the 8th Hussars at first, and then became a proud Royal Canadian Dragoon, an incredible career, rising up the ranks and first really becoming noticed nationally in some of his leadership responding to ice storms in New Brunswick, Ontario, Quebec, and then was the first Canadian to be the deputy commander of a U.S. military base, Fort Hood, and then becoming Chief of Defense Staff between 2005-2008, the challenging years of the war in Afghanistan. So a tremendous career of service and a great person, patriot, to talk about remembrance here on the Blue Skies Podcast. So welcome, General Hillier.
Erin, thank you. And look, you make me feel old right away. Oh my goodness. But I'm going to give you just a couple of minor corrections, not corrections, but just I'll put a different slant on two things you said.
Perfect.
Number one was, I'm a proud Dragoon, Royal Canadian Dragoons. But I also was, when I served with the regiment, a very proud 8th Hussar. And we had a regiment of incredible men at the time. It was all men in combat units then. And they were just awesome. And I was equally proud to be a part of that regiment and its great history serving Canada. And actually, I didn't wait till I finished university to join the Canadian Forces. I joined and went through regular officer training plan at Memorial University. And in those days, we had a lot of students in many universities across the nation, and Memorial was one of those. And so I was a member of the Canadian Forces as I studied at university, not Royal Military College, but Memorial University of Newfoundland. And I had the privilege to go back in later years after retiring as a soldier to go back and for 5 years be the chancellor of that actually beautiful university there. One of the great experiences of my life, for sure.
Well, you have a commitment both in uniform and out of uniform of service. And we're talking about Service and Remembrance Day today on the Blue Skies Podcast. Growing up in Campbellton in Newfoundland, what was your earliest memory of Remembrance Day and how that was celebrated, particularly in Newfoundland?
Well, first of all, now you made me feel so old I can't remember anything. It was so long ago. But actually, I do have this little flash memory, and I've said this before because it was a shaping time frame for my life and for me becoming a soldier. And we had this little tiny TV, and I know most people who might watch this can't relate to that. It was this little tiny TV. It was black and white. And the picture was horrible, and it used to roll all the time whenever the reception was bad. And I remember watching the National Memorial Service at the War Memorial in Ottawa on that little tiny black and white screen and just being absolutely enthralled by it. And, the Governor General, the Prime Minister, and I'm not sure I recognized the Chief of Defense Staff at the time or whoever was the senior military there. But the laying of wreaths and the playing of last posts and taps and I remember thinking, how I had a cold shiver down my back every time I saw that over 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, wouldn't it be awesome? Wouldn't it be incredible someday to be able to attend our National Remembrance Day service at the National War Memorial in Ottawa? And honest to goodness, the fall of 2005, all of a sudden I found myself standing there representing the Canadian Armed Forces and all those who served, and in a different way, perhaps their families also. But I remember thinking, oh my goodness, a little boy's dream realized in a way I never imagined it would be. And it still thrills me to this day. I'm still thrilled about going to the National War Memorial. I still get a cold shiver down my spine here whenever I hear Last Post being played down there, and the regimented ceremony that takes place there is just, to me, it's hauntingly beautiful, and it comes from that very first memories in Newfoundland, watching the National Remembrance Day program on that little tiny black and white TV and saying, I want to be there.
That's a great memory, and kind of a dream realized when you were Chief of Defence Staff. And in Newfoundland, I love the fact that in Newfoundland, Labrador, the July 1st commemoration for the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel, where the Royal Newfoundland Regiment obviously faced very heavy losses in World War I before officially joining Confederation and becoming part of Canada. The forget-me-nots and the remembrance that takes place often on Canada Day. Talk about that for a moment, because were there almost 2 days where there was special remembrance for Newfoundlanders?
Well, there weren't almost, there actually were. And the 1st of July and that horrible day in 1916 at the opening day of the Battle of the Somme, when the British commanders thought that the troops would get up and with artillery having pounded the Germans, they would just walk forward. And the enemy would be so devastated, so destroyed, so shell-struck that there would be almost no opposition. And in fact, the Newfoundland Battalion, having come in the previous winter from Gallipoli, where they really got their feet wet, so to speak, and took some casualties. I think we lost 44 Newfoundlanders at Gallipoli. Came into the trenches. We're at the forefront of the British attack in the 88th Brigade and the 29th Division from the British, and it was just horribly prepared and planned, amateurish in the extreme across the entire British front. The Newfoundlanders at 8:45 in the morning got the word to the advance. Another battalion had gone first through that same wire, and they just got obliterated. The commanding officer asked repeatedly, do you want me to advance? Was told, yes, get on with it. And there were only like 2 or 3 lanes cut through hundreds of meters of barbed wire and barbed wire entanglements. So as the Newfoundlanders moved forward in 2 companies, followed by 2 other companies, so about 200 soldiers in each block, and then 200 soldiers in each block behind, they had to come down to a very narrow gap in the wire and try to go through. And by now, of course, those gaps were targeted by the German machine gunners, German snipers, and most important of all, most lethal of all, were the German artillery observers, and artillery was falling in there. And in the next 45 minutes, out of 801 Newfoundlanders, only 62 were all that remained to be able to answer a roll call the next day. And, there went the youth and the leadership for the future of Newfoundland. And when we went to, the influenza epidemic in 1919 and the Great Depression and the failure of the cod fishery, it was not the first time in 1992 that it failed, and all those other things, and then bankruptcy and becoming again a ward of Great Britain in the 30s, we lacked the leadership because of that. And so in Newfoundland, what you saw was remembrance of that day. World War II was not a consideration hardly at all. Newfoundland's role with 2 artillery regiments and in the Navy and the Air Force was slightly different, but that destruction of our sons from Newfoundland was incredible. And every community and almost every family was affected in some way, shape, or form. The population was less than 200,000 at the time. So you imagine, 700 people. One of those 62 who survived, the caliber of the leaders came back to be eventually in the 50s the president of Scotiabank, or Bank of Nova Scotia at the time. It was quite incredible, the talent levels that we had and the talent levels that we lost. So morning of 1st of July in Newfoundland is Commemoration Day. And there are ceremonies at the war memorials, there are wreath layings, there are readings of the roll of honor of those who went and fought and gave their lives in service to us. The afternoon of 1st of July, hey, we celebrate Canada Day. Newfoundlanders can balance these emotions quite well. But then Remembrance Day on 11 November is just like the rest of the country. We also commemorate and we also remember there. But again, I would say the vast majority of that remembrance had to do with the first day of the Battle of the Somme, Beaumont Hamel, where the Newfoundland Regiment fought, and where we took such incredible losses that we've never really recovered from that, even though it's 100 and something years ago now.
Yeah, it took a slice out of a generation for Newfoundland, and as you said, that
and Erin, those who joined, when the war occurred and served the king and served the country, I mean, the calls went out, and those who joined that first swath of 5 to 100 to 1,000 and went overseas, they were the sons of the leaders at the time, the businessmen, the government officials, and people of that nature. And just naturally, in those days, in those generations, they would have become the next leaders. They all died at Beaumont Hamel. And so at the worst of times in our province in the next 30, 40 years, we were without that incredible leadership, and it certainly paid a toll in our province. We remember them. We remember every single one of them. And we all appreciate and love the caribou. That is the emblem of Newfoundland, the emblem of the badge of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and its place at Beaumont Hamel and the other 6 caribous around now the world. And we all remember.
Absolutely. You forget not. So for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, the forget-me-not flower is as powerful as the poppy. You and I are both wearing our poppies, but you always see a lot of the forget-me-nots, which was a tribute to that lost generation.
Very much so. And I had not realized, honestly, and so maybe I wasn't paying attention, that as a soldier in uniform, you were not permitted to wear the forget-me-not. And on the 1st of July or on Remembrance Day, you wore the poppy, but not the forget-me-not. And the Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland badgered me incessantly when I was Chief of Defense Staff and educated me wonderfully. Ed Roberts, a fine man who sadly has passed. And I signed the order saying, yes, we can. This is so important to Newfoundland. If you're a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, if you're from Newfoundland, if you're a member of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, you can wear the forget-me-not on the 1st of July.
That's wonderful. So you talked about those early memories of Remembrance Day as a young kid in Newfoundland, and then you joined ROTP when you went to Memorial University. What led you to join the Canadian Armed Forces at that point? Did you have some family members that had served? Was it that spirit of service that you saw as a young kid? Was there something that inspired you to put the uniform on?
It's hard to say specifically one thing, and in fact, there wasn't specifically one thing. There were a variety of things that led me to wanting to be a soldier from the time I can remember. And I used to joke, but it was a lot of truth to this. When I was 8 years old, I wrote off to a recruiting center asking for information, and they wrote back trying to recruit me. And obviously, the educational standards were much less in those days than what they are now. It was those memories, first of all, of remembrance and all those things about soldiers. And I think I appreciate it at a very early age in all of those remembrance ceremonies and the film that goes with that and the stories that went with it. I think I appreciate it even back in those days, what soldiers could do. And when I say soldiers, I do mean soldiers and aviators and sailors and special forces troopers, what they could do to change the world for the good. And I kind of wanted to be a part of that. Secondly, I had a great uncle who died on the 14th of August, 1917. And he was with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, 20 years old. All of my life growing up, I had heard from my dad about Uncle John Clark, my great Uncle John Clark, who left Camels in Newfoundland, went into St. John's, joined in early 1917, went off with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, ended up at Passchendaele in the early summer of 1917, and was wounded on or about 11 or 12 August of 1917 at Passchendaele, and then died a couple of days later in a medical center just behind the front lines. And I heard about him every day, and that certainly became a shaping part of my memory. And I have his last two letters home that were written at that time frame, and to read those time and time again, it just puts you in a different dynamic. I had seen his medals. I don't have them. I had seen the medals that he had, but he was part of my remembrance, and he was part of what encouraged me to serve. But I think thirdly, and the last thing, so the three things came together. At a very young age, I was reading military history. And I loved it. I think I was 10 when I read The Guns of August. And man, that's a tome, and I'm not even sure I could wade through it right now. But I was again enthralled by the idea of being a soldier, doing something that was so impactful, and I wanted to be a soldier from those days forward. I never changed my mind. as soon as I got old enough, I applied and joined, and I served for 35 years, 3 months, 2 days, and 14 hours. I loved every minute of it. There were minutes I did not like, but I loved every minute of it. And I consider myself a soldier now, even though I do not wear a uniform. I soldier for Canada and for a better world. All of those things came together to make me want to join. I've never regretted that decision. I keep saying, if I could do it all over again, I'd marry that same girl and I'd join and be a soldier all over again. And that's the two things I'd do all over again in my life.
No, and Joyce served right alongside you, and you share my passion for supporting our military families. They serve our country. So let's talk about some of that tremendous leadership you demonstrated when you were Chief of Defense Staff, Rick. When we talk about Remembrance Day, and I found even myself when I was Veterans Affairs Minister, we kind of have the paradigm of the older World War II veteran at the cenotaph. And when we think of veterans, we think of that big generation where, 1 million people served, and our country had that sort of multiple decades of treating and then reestablishing veterans after World War II. But we also have thousands of young veterans in their 30s from the Afghanistan War. And I want to talk about that because I do think as a country, we have to start talking about the modern military history and heritage we have from the longest mission of the Canadian Armed Forces, the war in Afghanistan. When you came in as Chief of Defense Staff in 2005, what was the state of play, and what were you expecting with respect to Canada's service in Afghanistan?
Well, Erin, first of all, what you say is very much correct about, in the, 70s, 80s, 90s. It was very much, if you weren't a World War II veteran, then you weren't a veteran. And I think in part because there was a vast majority of our troops spent their time training on peacetime operations at sea, in the air, and on the land, rather than on operations shaping things sometimes with violence, either overseas or, God forbid, here in Canada. And I think that was, I think for a longer period, I'm going to say this, and I don't want the Legion to come back at me, RC, because I think they're doing wonderful work now, but for a long period of time in the Royal Canadian Legion, which of course controlled our remembrance ceremonies and still do a wonderful job at it, I think in the view of the Legion, if you weren't a World War II veteran, you weren't a veteran. And I think that included the Korean War veterans. And the leadership in the Legion has changed. They've fundamentally changed, and they're welcoming to every single veteran. But I think as we went into the early 90s, and it's not just Afghanistan, I think as we went into the early 90s, and all of a sudden the Cold War ended, and the peace disappeared, and the hot war started in places like the former Republic of Yugoslavia. And, I was saying to somebody just recently, for years there, we had an investment in the former Yugoslavia of more than 4,500 troops, air, land, and sea at a time. And everybody talked about peacekeeping. There was no peace to keep. We were in the middle of a war, and we were just being handcuffed, hamstrung in many ways by people trying to refer to it as peacekeeping. But we had tens of thousands of veterans serve there. We had thousands more serve in Cyprus, thousands more serve in the Middle East, and in fact, help bring about not a lasting peace because we've had anything but there, but a stability that actually could lead to a lasting peace down the road here. And so we've had tens of thousands of Canadian men and women, our sons and daughters, serve in all of those places in high-risk situations. They are veterans in every single way that you can imagine. Afghanistan, the last number I think I saw was we had 40,000 men and women in uniform. Again, our sons and daughters serve in Afghanistan over that long period in harsh climate, harsh terrain, with somebody trying to kill them each and every single day. And I think the difference there was not only did they serve in Afghanistan in that war, but their families served figuratively alongside them. Much more so than any other operation we've ever been on, because we had instant communications with those families in almost every case. And, it worked both ways. The families at home were worried because they know about operations coming up in some form or guise. And the troops in theater, if something happened to the family back in Petawawa or Edmonton or Valcartier or anywhere else, they knew about it 10 minutes later. And if they had been distracted by that, if they weren't confident their families were being supported and looked after just as they were, then their attention would have been back there. It wouldn't have been downrange. And as a consequence, the risk to them and their battle buddies would have gone sky high. So I think in Afghanistan, the first thing that came out was our families were serving figuratively there with us. And we had to change how we perceived those families, and how then we supported those families, and how we responded to the fact that they were indeed serving. And, we used to have all these cynical comments when I was a young kid officer and young soldier. And one of them was, if the Army wanted you to have a family, we would have issued you one. And that's how we treated our families. They were spare baggage, but we had to change that concept, and we did a lot to do that. That was the number one change in going into Afghanistan. Our families were there figuratively with us. Number two was we were ill prepared for war. We were ill prepared for war. That concept of the peacekeeping operations, even though, again, in the former Yugoslavia, it was anything but that, in other places also, and really removed our war fighting skills, and really removed our ability to put combat units into theater supported by air, land, and sea, and all the things that go with it. And there actually was a maritime peace. It came out of the Gulf, the Arab Gulf, where our ships supported aircraft carriers who gave us air support inside of Afghanistan. We were ill prepared going in, and the urgency to rebuild the Canadian forces, have them focus on war fighting, get the right equipments, the right training, and make each successive rotation better prepared to go in and do the job. What the urgency to do that was overwhelming. And at the same time, thirdly, we were in a time frame, and I'll stop here. We were in a time frame where I felt that in Canada we had lost. I'm going to say we started to lose. We had lost the pride in being a soldier of Canada, in serving our nation in the armed forces uniforms. And I think Canadians didn't notice us. When they did, it was normally for negative things. Flash forward to today, sadly. And I think soldiers, our sons and daughters, had lost pride in doing that. And my wife came home from work one day, and somebody had talked to her, and they said, hey, something happened. There was a front page article, and somebody had said to my wife, knowing she's married to a soldier, hey, if you're in uniform or married to somebody in uniform, you should be ashamed to come out of doors, kind of thing, come outside. And so those three things were massively impactful on what we were doing. Families were there with us. We were ill prepared to fight that war. And it was at a time when morale was, as low as whale's poop in the Canadian Forces, and our pride in wearing our uniform had suffered.
Yeah, no, you've touched on some huge things there. And I've seen your leadership in all of them. Of course, your creation of the Military Families Fund. And I got to work with you when the True Patriot Love organization supported your efforts to support that family piece. The equipment, we remember the green uniforms at first, and the pivot from Kabul to Kandahar too. I think you not only help give some pride to the people in uniform and their families, you kind of shook up Canadian complacency, because there was going to be a big change when we took one of the more dangerous provinces in Afghanistan. There were going to be serious injuries. There was going to be casualties. There was going to be incredible combat. We saw that. I think a lot of Canadians probably first got to know Rick Hillier when you gave a very colorful description of the Taliban, and you basically said, we're going over to take on these scumbags, or I can't remember the exact quote.
I think that was it.
Was that it? I remember scumbag. You basically help shake the country out of its complacency, saying, hey, our men and women are going to be doing a job for us alongside our allies, and some of them aren't coming home, and we're doing this because we're taking on scumbags that aren't allowing girls to go to school. They're killing people, maiming people. Was that comment planned, Rick? Was it just from your heart? And what was the reverberations from it when it became sort of viral before things went viral?
Well, so first of all, yes, the comment was planned.
Okay.
We were still, in a diffuse situation where people talk about, we'll keep peace over there, there'll be peacekeepers over there, we'll be with the UN. We were going to war. And although the term war itself is always used politically, and that's what people want to say, oh, we're at war or we're not at war. There are other uses for it, and we were. And so so I did use the phrase, I did try to describe, because I felt, and I use this, I've said something that I still see repeated today. It's kind of interesting to see it flash up from time to time. And I said, when Canadian troops walk on dirty, dangerous trails 12,000 kilometers from home, every Canadian should walk with them. And I believe that we could not go out to do those hard things at high risk, so far from home, under such tough circumstances, with the probability we would not bring everybody home alive without the complete support of our nation. And my intent was to let Canada's moms and dads know what their sons and daughters were going to be doing, and that they needed that support. And when I made the comment, and I was not very good at clearing things with government with our government beforehand. Hey, I'm going to say this kind of thing, so a little reverberation there, and okay, I'll take that. But for about 2 days, it was pretty sensitive and pretty hyper in the rhetoric that was coming around Ottawa itself. 2 days later, I went to Edmonton along with the Minister of Defence, a great Canadian, Bill Graham, who sadly just passed, and with the Deputy Prime Minister, who was from Alberta, Ham McClellan. And I know they were worried about the commentary and what was going on. And they walked into the airport at Edmonton, where we were getting 150 troops ready to deploy that evening. And we're going around shaking hands. And they got an onload from our troops, the Patricias, who said to them, it's about time we described it the way it is. It's about time we have a leader in uniform, not a politician. And it's about time somebody says this. And it kind of changed the whole dynamic then when they went back to Ottawa. And yeah, there were repercussions, but actually I think people said, oh my goodness, somebody is saying it right for the first time. I didn't beat on that after that. I just said, these are Canada's sons and daughters. We're going to send them off to do our nation's will, to look after our interests, to carry with them our values, and they need you to be with them the entire time in a whole variety of ways. If a young soldier in your neighborhood, your son, figuratively perhaps speaking, if a young soldier is leaving, then you have an event and say goodbye to that young soldier. And as he's going out the door, tell him you're going to look after his family and you're going to make sure they're all okay. And you're going to look after him. And then when he comes home or she comes home, that you're going to welcome them home in great circumstances and pomp and pageantry, if you will, as the heroes that they are. We're not after things for free. We're just saying, hey, recognize those young men and women. And it takes nothing to do so. And when you see them in uniform or when you identify them, pat them on the back, shake their hand. And at the same time, advocate for them to have the right training, the right equipment, the right numbers, and the right support in the government of Canada. And do all the above as you see fit, but you don't have a vote to stay disengaged. Be engaged. These are your sons and daughters.
Well said. And you, I think, woke people up to the fact that there were going to be risks, but also to the fact that we needed to be proud and, as you said, walk alongside them on the other side of the world. And their brave exploits alongside that leadership really did resonate. I think, having served myself in the kind of decade of darkness, and as you were talking about after the Somalia crisis, when there was really stories of people not wearing their uniforms to work, changing so they wouldn't be seen in public in the uniform, it went 180 degrees. You saw people doing little fundraisers to buy Tim Hortons for the troops. You saw the Highway of Heroes concept of just regular folks, members of the Legion, firefighters, police, seniors out on the bridges of the Highway of Heroes. It was that service and the sacrifice of the men and women in Afghanistan kind of reawoke people's love for our military. Was that a powerful signal for not only our troops on the ground there, but the leadership here in Ottawa? And did it help you in your mission to get the right equipment and get kit over to them so that they could fight this war effectively?
Oh my goodness. Yes, and yes. Did it help? Absolutely. We could not have done this and what we did during the time, good, bad, or mediocre, a lot or not quite enough. We could not have done any of it without the support of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And, I recall even after I retired, I was down in the Owen Sound area and with Toronto Dominion, who had put on an event to fill a box for every single Canadian soldier deployed. I think it was 3,800 at the time, with everything that you could imagine. We had all these volunteers from around the communities come in, donating things, buying things to put into it, and then packing them all up and shipping them off, and that kind of thing alone. There were members of the legislative assemblies there were members of parliament there, and they were carrying back. Oh my goodness, the support out there is so incredible for our men and women in uniform and what we are asking them to do, and therefore we need to make sure that they are prepared to do that and have the greatest possible chance of success when they come home. I was very fortunate, and I said this publicly recently in an interview. I was very fortunate when I came in to be the Chief of Defense Staff that I was selected and asked to be by two incredible Canadians, Bill Graham, who I mentioned earlier, but also former Prime Minister Paul Martin, for whom I have the greatest respect and love. And those individuals, they wanted to do what was right. They wanted to rebuild the Canadian Forces. As the Prime Minister said to me, when I see the vision that resonates, we're going to do it. We're going to do it big time. And we got on that track about the vision that resonates. And he was incredibly supportive and started us down the road for that rebuild. He of course, lost the election. And then Stephen Harper came in. And the second two individuals were Stephen Harper and Gord O'Connor. And in different entirely from Graham and from Martin, obviously.
Yeah.
But enormously effective in their support for the Canadian Forces, men and women in uniform, getting the right equipment. And Gord O'Connor was just a methodical guy. Hey, we need this number of aircraft. We need this kind of lift. We need this kind of fighting capability on the ground. And despite a lot of the sort of discussion in the media, he and I worked superbly together. And I said to him one time, and we agreed, I said, Minister, we agree on far more than we can ever afford or have time to get done. So you and I focus on all of that, and the stuff that we'd have to discuss, we'll get to that if we ever get the money and or time. And so we worked very well together. The Prime Minister, when we ran into Medusa in early fall, so Labor Day weekend of 2006, and Gord O'Connor and I went to the cabinet and said, hey, we need more in Afghanistan. We can't carry the weight, the water in Kandahar with what we have. The Prime Minister and Cabinet, and I recall Peter MacKay, Jim O'Flaherty, just stepping up and saying, yep, we got to do this and let's do it now. The only thing I regret is the Finance Minister said to Gord O'Connor, oh, let's take it out of D&D's budget. I said, no, we need all of that money. It helped us. I was blessed by those two Prime Ministers and those two Ministers of Defense and Chiefs of Staff that really supported through some very, very difficult times. And we made sure that as far as humanly possible, and it wasn't perfect, I don't pretend that our men and women were prepared to go over, and we were meeting our goal of making each rotation in of essentially a brigade combat team in that was better prepared by the training in Wainwright, the equipment they had, the lessons we had learned over the preceding 1 to 6 months, that they were better prepared than the ones who were leaving, and that when they came back, they were starting to get the support they needed back here. So it all came back to Canadians supporting it. If Canadians hadn't supported their sons and daughters in the ways we talked about, and 10,000 others, all those baseball games and basketball games and hockey games where the Washington Capitals had a Canadian Forces appreciation game in Washington, D.C. I mean, how cool was that? It was just absolutely wonderful. Without that kind of grassroots support, we wouldn't have had a chance.
No, it was heartwarming to see, and I had the good honor of attending some of them, including the Maple Leafs, which I know you like as well. They do a fantastic military appreciation night. The Sens, the Oilers, Flames, Canucks, they've all maintained it too, which has been wonderful. We had Luke's Troops, remember, at the Leafs games, and that has been continued, where they highlight a serving member and their family in the stands. It was spectacular, and I think the bravery of our men and women, but also the kick in the ass that you kind of gave the country, I think came at the perfect time. I want to leave this. Those are all highs. I also want to talk.
Could I, Erin? You said
sure. Yeah.
I can make a couple little points here on this one. Look, I talked about some really good leaders that made a difference. Yeah, as we were in that tough time. Well, there were some folks out there in that sporting world, but the Canadian world who did, when young soldiers on a mission in Afghanistan at 3:00 in the morning come into what was called Canada House, a big tent with a big TV in it, and they're coming in. This is April, I think it is, and they're coming in at 3 a.m. because they can't sleep, and they're getting ready to go out, but they're going to watch a couple of periods of that hockey game, and sitting there in the middle of the tent watching his team play is Paolo Aquilini from the Vancouver Canucks, one of the owners. And I said to him, "Shoot, Paolo," I said, if I owned an NHL team and they were in the playoffs, I think I'd be there. He chose to be in Afghanistan to show his support. Brian Burke, give Brian Burke so much credit. He drove the Leafs and really Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment to do so much, and went to Afghanistan himself several times. And Eugene Melnick did exactly the same thing. And I can never thank any of those individuals enough for what they did. And Eugene, when he passed last March, I remember that part so fondly, of his support for our troops and the fact that he was their number one fan. So there were leaders around the country who just stood up, and you were one of those. And Michael Burns, and of course Sean Francis with True Patriot Love, which continues to be marvelous to this day. That's part of our grassroots support, which allowed us to be as successful as we could be as a nation, I believe, during that time frame.
Well, I think everyone wanted to do their part. They saw my community where I grew up, Bowmanville, you've been there, is on the Highway of Heroes. And so I was out on the bridges. And I think everyone, whether the sports world, the corporate world, that's what True Patriot Love grew out of. Everyone wanted to do their part, whether it was there was an elderly lady in my community that raised money for Timmy's cards that she then sent over to Kandahar so that they could buy it at the Timmy's. Don Cherry and some of the amazing players, retired NHLers that went to the forward operating bases too, and met some of our special forces. Everyone kind of did their part. And one thing I wanted to highlight, because it was very powerful for our community, and you helped come to Durham and to Clarington to open our park and our Highway of Heroes Lav Memorial. The repatriation was probably the most heartfelt Canadian phenomenon during the Afghanistan War, where organically people came out on the bridges. There was no mayor or prime minister saying, be out on the bridges and show support, show love to those families. It was an organic expression of, we know your loss, we love you, and we will not forget your son or daughter. You saw that in action. You know the power of that phenomenon on the families. Talk about that for a minute, Rick, because I think that was probably one of the most special times for our country. And many other provinces in solidarity now have highways of heroes, but that stretch of the 401 between Trenton and Toronto, talk about that special time in our country.
Well, as a uniformed service, the Army, Navy, the Air Force, Special Forces, we've always said farewell to those we lose in a ceremonial fashion that is heart-wrenching in its simplicity and its dignity. And I flash back to April of 2002 when we lost our 4 young soldiers at Tarnack Farms, and we did this incredible memorial service out in Edmonton. And I was deputy commander of the Army. The day after, I was doing an interview. Somebody phoned up for an interview and talk about our loss and what we would do. And the individual said to me, "Oh my goodness, this was just like completely exhaustive, this whole process. What will you do when you lose the next soldier or next soldiers?" And I said, "You know something? We'll do exactly what we just did. We're going to carry on doing that forever. The question is, what will the country do? Will the country follow it as closely?" And the answer was absolutely yes. And sadly, I was down those Highway of Heroes, and I was in Trenton not for every body of a soldier returning, but the vast majority of them to meet their families, etc. And then when those families went down the Highway of Heroes, no matter how much they had been told about it, how much they had seen it on TV, they were unprepared for the emotional impact on them. And I used to say to the folks that I got an opportunity to talk to who had been on those bridges, and in fact, one time at Bowmanville, if I recall this correctly, we even had the elephant from the Bowmanville Zoo out on the bridge as a tribute. And people simply crossing their hand on their heart, saluting, flags flying. And when I had an opportunity to talk to people and thank them for doing that, I would say to them, you got to realize, of course, and I know you do, that for the parents, the spouses, the children, the siblings, you're not changing one single thing. they've still lost their husband or their wife or their son or their daughter or their mom or their dad. But I said, when they lose somebody, think of how much worse it could have been if they thought that nobody even noticed. And if not only did they, and if even if they noticed, that nobody would remember. And that was usually the first questions, did anybody notice that I lost my son? And secondly, if they noticed, did they know what a loss that was? This is my boy, who grew up, and he was a bit of an orangutan, and we weren't sure what he was going to do. And I got that story from some parents, and then he joined the army, and he found his calling. He wanted to go to Afghanistan, and so question 2 was, do they understand the scale and scope and magnitude of that loss? And the third question always was, but will they remember? Mm-hmm. And I say to folks on those bridges who gave that huge emotional impact, by you being there, simply being there, saluting with your flag, just standing there, you answered yes to all 3 of those questions. And it was tough for those parents, that wife, that husband, that family member. Think how much more difficult it would have been if the answer to all 3 questions in their mind was no. And I said, by that, you simply carry us as a nation. It was absolutely incredible. Every person who's ever gone out, I want to say thank you from the heart, because you can't imagine the impact that you had not only on those families and on the memory of the awesome Canadians that we lost, but in the life, the emotion, the psyche of every single serving member, those who were retired and their families, because we felt supported. We felt we weren't alone. And if I could go back to what I said earlier, we felt that figuratively, Canadians walked with us.
Yeah, and it was one big embrace of love as you came down the highway from the tops of bridges. Rebecca's family was visiting from Nova Scotia when we lost one of our soldiers, and they were there for the repatriation. And it was so special for them as folks from Nova Scotia to be there with us in Bowmanville on the bridge. And you described to a T Trooper Darrell Caswell from Bowmanville. We had one of our own pass under, and his family always said it was when he found the military, he joined the Dragoons, and he found that purpose in life and that heading. And they helped organize the Highway of Heroes Monument in our community. So special. So when Canadians are reminded of the service of our men and women, they really respond. So on Remembrance, Rick, I want to get into 2 last topics. One, of course, we talk about loss and heroics, and then how we can remember. Let's talk first about the fallen from Afghanistan. Certainly, you talked about Operation Medusa, some of the tremendous combat we saw, and the incredible bravery of some of our men and women. Talk about a few of those instances that you think Canadians should remember now that we are memorializing this period of our military heritage. I know there are a million acts, many of them not even recognized, but what are 1 or 2 that stand out for you and the Canadians that just stepped up with tremendous bravery and courage when called upon?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things Canadians will remember, and certainly anybody who served in Afghanistan, and many of those who did not, because it's been back here since, was what we called our little Afghanistan memorial at the base in Kandahar. And it had a plaque on that memorial right there for every single Canadian that we had lost. And, you walk past that small memorial, very simple, very dignified, very emotional, and you salute it. Because you were continuing to honor those individuals, to remember them, and to thank them for their service to Canada. It was absolutely incredible. There were so many acts of bravery as to be unbelievable. And when I say we were woefully unprepared for war, we were equally woefully unprepared to I think, recognize the kind of courage and bravery in combat that is the mark of the soldier, the sailor, the aviator, and the Special Forces trooper, and to be able to step up and recognize enough of them to make sure that we had done the appropriate things. And I just come to Private Jess LaRochelle as a case in point. There's a young 20-year-old private deploys in late summer of 2006 into Afghanistan. On the 14th of October, he deploys to Strong Point Center with his platoon, which is 3 sections of 8 soldiers. One section has gone into Kandahar, so they're down. And they arrive there, and they're told they're going to get hit. The intelligence is out. They're going to get hit, and very soon. And the master corporal running this section said, we got to put somebody into the observation post here to give early warning. I don't have enough troops to put 2 soldiers in, and that's something we always do. That's tactical doctrine. Never put somebody by themselves. He said, we're so short. Master Corporal Jeremy LeBlanc, this was, and do we have anybody who will step up to do it? And Jess Larochelle did, stuck his hand up, went up there. They got hit minutes after that. And in particular, in his observation post, he got hit by rocket-propelled grenades. And the first one that had detonated overhead knocked him back into the steel-hard mud walls, which have been dried in the desert for thousands of years, probably. He had the retina in his right eye was detached. He's bleeding from the ears, and he's got vertebrae broken in his back. And somehow he shakes it off. He comes to, regains consciousness, and he said it was kind of like Star Wars with the RPG-7s detonating overhead inside. He got onto the machine gun, and he just started shooting into the attacking group of about 40 attackers. He fired so many rounds that he only had 100 left or thereabouts. And he said, I kept the 100 just in case a last-ditch sort of assault. And then he started picking up the M72 disposable rocket launchers in the observation post. These are just cardboard tubes. You extend them, the sights pop up. You pull the safety back and arm it, and you put it on your shoulder and fire it, and you throw it away, the tube that's left. And he started firing one after the other, at individual soldier or individual Taliban that were attacking him. This went on for well over an hour and a half. And finally, the attack sort of dies down a little bit, in huge part because of his bravery and valor and because of the fire he brought to bear. The lieutenant, the platoon commander, goes running forward to get up to the OP. He looked at it and said, oh, my goodness, ain't nobody going to be alive inside of there. That thing is totally destroyed. And this little head popped up, and it was Jess Larochelle, and said, hey, sir, I'll put some covering fire down. You come on in. Lieutenant went in, and he said, Jess, you've done your job. I'll replace you. And Jess said, no, sir, I've got it. Don't put somebody else in this environment. I know the lay of the land now. I'm here. And he volunteered to stay on. He got reinforced by a warrant officer, so both of them there overnight. The next morning, he was relieved. Another platoon came in. During the fight, they had lost 2 of their members of their platoon, and so they headed back to Kandahar Airfield to do the ramp ceremony to say farewell to them. It was only after that Private Jess Larochelle, 20 years old, a son of our nation, said to the medics, I'm hurting just a little bit, and went off, and we discovered his back was broken, his retina is detached on his right eye, bleeding from the ears, and this kid has been beaten up brutally, wounded badly, and he was taken out of combat and over a series of painful steps, returned to Canada and went through medical support, still having major issues from that. He was awarded the Star of Military Valor. I chaired the Honors and Awards, the Canadian Forces Honors and Awards Committee at the time that recommended that. And I remember saying to his commanding officer when I saw him in Afghanistan, Omer Lavoie, who retired as a lieutenant general, I said, Jess was as close to a Victoria Cross winner as I've seen in my life. And I said, we made our decision in part because that it was Star of Military Valor and not Victoria Cross, in part because we were, and I say this kind of humorously, we were kind of like the French figure skating judge of infamous reputation from the, I think it was 2004 Olympics, where she was saving her marks for when the French skaters came onto the ice. And of course that was found out and overturned. And we were kind of saying, well, if Jess wins it, what if somebody now next week is going to be even more valorous? And in fact, we shouldn't have been saying that in my view. Nobody could be more valorous. Others could be equal, but nobody could be more than Jess Larochelle. And I think he deserved the Victoria Cross. But there is one example of a 20-year-old son of our nation, standing tall, doing the duty that we asked him to do, and doing it without, relating to the fact that he's been shot at, people are trying to kill him, he's been wounded, and he still carries on the fight. And just such a quiet young man, nothing sort of over the top about him, unassuming, and those are, one of the 40,000 who served in Afghanistan. The other 39,000 and change were just like that. Incredible Canadians. And we saw examples of that courage every single day.
Yeah.
Talked to a young Corporal Phage, who was a gunner in a Lab 3. And on the 14th of August, 2006, at the start of Op Medusa, the day they took over the mission from the other battle group leaving, they got hit by 75 to 100 Taliban, just kept coming at them, firing at them. And he just stayed there exposed to the fire in his turret and just, fired into attack after attack after attack to make sure that the Taliban weren't going to take over Kandahar city and cut off the troops that were out there. We saw one example after another of valor, of courage, of bravery, and simply service before self. That was incredible.
Valor in the face of the enemy, extraordinary courage from ordinary soldiers that are stepping up into remarkable situations, and the training kicks in, but then that deep courage and valor kicks in. As you know, both of us have been trying to echo some of the efforts from Valor in the Presence of the Enemy and Bruce Moncourt and the Afghanistan War Veterans Association. Bruce himself, an injured Afghanistan war vet, they've been raising awareness of the Just La Rochelle case. Tens of thousands of Canadians have emailed, have signed the petition, because I think, the longest mission in Canadian Armed Forces history, as you said earlier, Rick, 40,000 men and women served there, one capacity at some point. These are tens of thousands of modern war veterans in our country now, and no Victoria Crosses. 18-star military valor, which is an incredible distinction. But what does it say when we're not willing to look back and recalibrate and get it right? As you said, there was a reluctance to award because you're almost waiting for this unicorn case to come out of the wilderness. But if you actually look at World War II and World War I, depending on the time of war, depending on the circumstance, there were citations for the Victoria Cross, not as, tremendously tough, arduous injuries as Jess's case. Is this something that Canada should have a body to look at this in a non-political, arm's length, take the emotion away and just make sure we get it right? Do you support an initiative like that?
Erin, I do, and let me just say at the front end here, as I mentioned, I chaired the Canadian Forces Honors and Awards Committee that assessed the citation from about Just La Rochelle. And it's just I think 2-paragraph citation. The amount of information in there is sparse, frankly, and so I accept responsibility that we did not push harder for a Victoria Cross nomination for him and recommend to the Government Honors and Awards a Victoria Cross, i.e. to the Governor General. But I think that Canada would be served appropriately by an ability to do independent reviews, a neutral independent review of cases of recognition or lack of recognition that there is sufficient reason to review. And I look at the United States of America, and we love to criticize the Americans, but my goodness, they've got it squared away. They've got an independent review, and they're working back to the wars in their nation's history, and they're saying, hey, there was somebody here, if that person had been anything but or in any area, he or she would have been awarded the Medal of Honor. And they've, I think, awarded something like 25 medals of honor that they felt individuals should have received, was appropriate to have received, and did not get it for one reason or another. I'd love to see an independent review, a committee established in Canada, and use the case of Just La Rochelle, because I think there is sufficient richness of detail, as I would describe it, about what happened on that day and the extent of his wounds and the fact that he carried on valorous in the face of the enemy despite those wounds over such an extended period of time. Use that case as a first one to get going. And I do think if we had an independent review and we looked at Just La Rochelle, there would be no reason not to actually start looking back in history at Korea, World War II, World War I. There were many different things in our nation at the time, and I think back to Francis Bagama-Gabao, the great sniper of World War I with 376 kills to his credit, wounded multiple times, gassed at Ypres, in April 1915, and to the extent that he had to sleep sitting up for the rest of his life because his lungs were burnt so badly inside, and if he had been lying prone, he would have drowned in his own liquids inside. I think that military medal winner times two. I kind of think if he had been a Caucasian, he probably would have been a Victoria Cross winner. Sergeant Tommy Prince from the Devil's Brigade, the 1st Special Forces, his actions alone in southern France in August of 1944, where the Germans thought they were surrounded by a company of soldiers, and it was Sergeant Tommy Prince by himself who prevented a French platoon from being annihilated. I think maybe he would have been a Victoria Cross winner if it had been done impartially and the way we would do it now. So I think an independent review, absolutely independent of government, independent of the Canadian military, and do an honest assessment. All of our allies seem to be able to do this, and we in Canada appear not to be able. So Australia said, no, we don't do that. And then 2 months later, they actually do it and recommend an 18-year-old sailor from 1942 to the Queen for the Victoria Cross before she passed, obviously. And that young sailor posthumously received the Victoria Cross. I think an independent review to consider any additional detail, consider the circumstances as best possible, and you might not be able to come to decisions. That's the way it is, would be appropriate for a nation like us.
I agree 100%. I also think we owe it to our men and women that serve, particularly the Afghanistan War Veterans Association have called for this with respect to Jess La Rochelle. And we have to be mature enough, as you said, to realize there probably were attitudes of the day in the past for Indigenous soldiers, minority soldiers, Jewish soldiers. I've already heard of a number of cases where people deserve a second look. That type of extraordinary valor means that we at least have to be willing to give an impartial, independent look to make sure that somebody's heroics and incredible bravery wasn't diminished because of intolerance or these sorts of things. So I brought a motion forward months ago, as you may know. We had sort of all party support until the last minute, and I think somewhere in one of the big office towers here in Ottawa resisted it. But I do know there's a lot of goodwill out there for it, and I do think this Remembrance Day, let's remember the incredible service and sacrifice of our Afghanistan war veterans, including people like Jess La Rochelle, who, as you said, in Sudbury, he is still recovering from those wounds of service. And I think Canadians this year, let's remember that. One thing I want to say as we wrap up, Rick, and thank you for your incredible service. I know you well enough, and I'm privileged to call you a friend. You always deflect your own leadership and your own conduct, but I've watched your incredible leadership to the point that on the National Day of Honor here in Ottawa, when the Afghanistan mission ended and we had this magnificent celebration of that dedication of our men and women, the 40,000, as you said, and Simon Mailloux and Rick Hansen were the chairs of the event here. Simon Mailloux, an incredible injured veteran who redeployed. Rick Hansen, an honorary colonel, tremendous person. It was a wonderful day. And I look out, and there in the ranks on the front lawn of Parliament is Rick Hillier. You weren't up in the dais. You weren't up. You were down with the troops. And I pointed out to Rebecca, and I said, that is leadership. You were out there in the ranks with the folks you served with.
Erin, thank you for saying that. And no better place to be than in the ranks of those incredible men and women. And I had mixed emotions, and I didn't want to detract from or take the limelight from those incredible folks. I wasn't sure I'd go. I was doing some work with TELUS at the time, and I'll give them full credit here. Folks reached out to me and said, hey, I was in Newfoundland and said, hey, we think you should be at the National Day of Honor. So I flew to Ottawa. I went into the TELUS building downtown that morning. And when I walked in, there were about 75 people in the lobby who applauded. I know they were clapping. I was there, but they were applauding every soldier, sailor, airman, or woman who had served in Afghanistan. And it was just emotional. And that day was absolutely incredible. It was beautifully done. I was quite content to be in the ranks with the brothers and sisters with whom I served, and almost all of whom I knew in some way, shape, or form. And it was the most incredibly emotional time, and I think rewarding time that I can remember. It was awesome.
Well, you were fortunate to be with your brothers and sisters in arms, Rick, and those brothers and sisters in arms, our men and women in uniform, military families, our veterans, have been tremendously fortunate to have your leadership for Canada, your 35 years and several days and hours. But your time as Chief of Defense, when you helped with thousands of Canadians reawaken our respect and our love for our military and their families. Thank you for your incredible service, and thank you for joining the Blue Skies Remembrance Day podcast with me today.
Erin, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And for me, as service, it was a labor of love. It was and remains thus. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, that has been a very powerful Remembrance Day Blue Skies podcast. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. And we've had some great memories from Canada's Chief of Defense staff during some of the challenging years of the Afghanistan War. And we need to remember our history, our military heritage as we stand at our cenotaphs, whether here at the National War Memorial or I'll be in Bowmanville with Branch 178 of the Royal Canadian Legion. Lest we forget, this Remembrance Day, thank a veteran, wear a poppy, attend a cenotaph ceremony, and make sure we show support to those who serve us. Thanks for tuning in to the Blue Skies podcast.
We will remember them. Whole Canada.
Well said.